Thank you, Sean. Great to be here with everyone this morning, and we're thrilled that you and Melissa have put this conference on. We, wish we could all be together, and we're supposed to all be together, but this is the new world that I know everyone who's on this morning has gotten used to. Thank you also to Carrie Hayden and Beth Schiff, who without support of the community, these types of programs and the visionary work that's happening at UC could never go forward. So thank you all and everyone behind the scenes. This has been an effort that's been planned for months and months, and we're thrilled to be here to share some information today.
Thank you also to this wonderful audience we have today, that we're sharing this time together. And while we can't see each other up close in person, we feel your energy, and we know that we share some of your story and that each of us have our own unique story. So we're really honored to be here and sharing this time with you. So whether this is your first step, your 100th step, your 1,000th step towards lifestyle cancer change, it all really matters. And as you know, you are either becoming an expert or are an expert in your own cancer story or a loved one's cancer story. Lorenzo and I speak together. As was said, we provide the science, which is really compelling and easy to understand, as well as strategies and things that you can do if you're looking to make change in your lifestyle to either ward off a cancer diagnosis or to reduce your risk of a recurrence. A little bit about our story. Lorenzo and I are actually husband and wife. We have 3 children, and how we find ourselves talking together today. Lorenzo got a job at MD Anderson Cancer Center, and he would come home. I was teaching in the classroom, and he would come home talking about all the very compelling science about cancer and lifestyle. And then we started having a young family. And we realized that we could provide tools for them to live a healthier life. And so we put a lot of energy into doing things that were really healthy for our kids. And then we realized that we weren't living that life. And so we and our community of friends started making real change in our life about the way in which we were living. And we realized that people didn't have this unique perspective with Lorenzo's background in the science and mine as an educator. And so we started speaking in our community around the country and in places around the world. And we decided to write a book to share this information. And on the day that we submitted our draft for our book, Lorenzo was diagnosed with advanced cancer. So we took on another role, which was cancer patient and cancer caregiver, and I'll let him talk to you about that. But the most important thing to know is that we want all of you and ourselves to build bodies that are inhospitable to cancer. So that's what we hope that we will share with you today.
So people in the United States and the world actually have gotten more used to looking at numbers and statistics and percentages because of the novel coronavirus and the ensuing illness that's called COVID-19. And as a cancer scientist, I'm always looking at numbers and percentages and statistics. And, here's some very startling numbers when we think about what's going on in the world. With this year estimated just in the United States, 1.8 million new cancer cases and over 500,000 deaths. So if we think about, percentage deaths due to an illness, this is quite startling. With 150,000 new cases every month being diagnosed and 50,000 deaths. This is something that's quite startling. And in fact, the numbers are getting worse as we'll get into some of the information as to why. But A lot of the reason is because of lifestyle. And of course, the good news is that we know how to prevent the majority of cancer in our world. And this is some data from the American Association for Cancer Research, but other organizations, American Cancer Society, National Cancer Institute, the WHO, there's pretty clear consensus that we could prevent at least a third of cancers if tobacco and tobacco-related products did not exist on our planet. That is 1/3. Then the next category is around what we call energy balance. So if you were to combine obesity and overweight with diet and exercise, which are all interrelated, that accounts for almost another third of cancers. The third one there, we're all familiar with viruses now, and many people don't know, but some cancers are actually caused through viral transmission, in particular the human papilloma virus, which accounts for about 100% of cervical cancers. This is the #1 cancer in women in India. A number of head and neck cancers, anal cancer, penile cancer, all related to the human papilloma virus. And we have a vaccine. So we're all desperately waiting for this coronavirus vaccine, which is coming. There already is a vaccine to against the majority of strains that cause cervical cancer and head and neck cancer. And frighteningly, less than half, or about half of the population has received the vaccine, those who are eligible, which now has gone all the way up to 45 years of age. So this is something that we need to implement more. You see next there, diet and exercise, that we'll get into detail about, environmental, occupational exposures. Importantly, alcohol is there by itself. Often you can bundle it in with food as a beverage, but they separate it, and alcohol is a known carcinogen. In the recent American Cancer Society guidelines for cancer prevention essentially say avoid alcohol in order to reduce risk of cancer. Now, there probably is a dose-response relationship, and they have a caveat that says, well, if you do drink, no more than 1 a day for women and 2 a day for men. That probably is too much. And again, they don't have that same caveat for nicotine. Well, you could have 1 a day or 1 a month, and that would be okay. So it's a carcinogen, causes cancer. Endocrine related issues, which we won't get into the details of that in terms of pregnancy and onset of menarche and the like. Breastfeeding is really important for you, the baby, as well as actually cancer prevention. And then the next category is really ultraviolet light, sun exposure, and most importantly, being protected from scorching sunburns under the age of 20. And having Italian background and family in Italy, we would go to Italy every summer and spend summers at the beach and go to Greece. And I had multiple scorching sunburns under the age of 20. Not that I'm totally blaming my parents, but kind of blaming my parents that what happens when you have 5 or more scorching sunburns under the age of 20, you increase your risk of melanoma by 80%. 80%. So use that sunscreen. I didn't. And so then, lo and behold, 20, 30 years later, I'm diagnosed with an advanced melanoma, underwent treatment over 2 years ago, feel better than ever. And we can talk about that too. And then there's the environmental pollutants that we'll talk about. And what's important to know is that actually the minority of cancers, and in fact, only 5 to 10% of cancers are due to an inherited gene mutation. So a heritable risk factor that you would get from your parents. And the majority are either due to bad luck and chance, which is a huge part of it. We're not sure the exact percentage, but minimum 50% of cancers are due to these modifiable risk factors that we are in control of.
So today we're going to talk briefly about these 6 areas, which we call the mix of 6. And often, we think of our health in silos, like, diet or weight control, exercise. it's really important to think of it with this broad umbrella. So social support, stress management, sleep, physical activity, diet, and exposure to environmental toxins. And we put them in a specific order, which we'll talk about, but really important to look at your health as a whole. And it also takes the pressure off potentially an area that you really want to work on or you really need to work on by seeing that you have other areas where your health is in fairly good shape.
What's important to know also is that what we're going to talk about today, and I'm not going to take us too deep into the biology, but all of the mix of six have an impact on what are called the cancer hallmarks. These are biological processes that need to be activated, stimulated, upregulated to allow a mutated cell to grow in your body. And we all have mutating cells that are happening in our body. Again, this is just random chance that can happen, or some exogenous factor is causing damage to the DNA in some fashion, and then that cell continues to replicate out of control, which of course is the definition of cancer. So it's important to know the mix of six factors, and the evidence is extensive in this area, and we go into details in the book. They're not just about feeling better and improving your quality of life. They're changing our biology, either increasing our risks of cancer or decreasing our risk of cancer. And these same factors are actually relevant for other types of non-communicable diseases that are linked to lifestyle. So there's an overarching theme. In particular, inflammation is relevant for cardiovascular disease as well as Alzheimer's. As well as of course, we don't want viruses and other such things to evade immune destruction. So a lot of the mix of six is specifically related to immune function.
So synergy, the phenomenon where the whole is more than the sum of the parts. So in looking at that and thinking about synergy, asking yourself, do you have negative or positive synergy going on? I think that we can all really relate to what negative synergy is. You sleep poorly, you wake up in the morning, you have a carbo-loaded breakfast, you skip exercising, you're not as polite and kind to your loved ones, your cognitive function is decreased. So we all understand that. And what we really want to do is create positive synergy amongst the mix of six. So that is where we start. And one very important thing to remember is that no matter where you are right now, this is a moment to step forward with a positive intent, because guilt, blame, and shame don't belong right now here. And they're not positive for you to step forward and make change in your life. So push those to the side. If you have to reinvestigate them a little later on in your journey, do so. But really, it's about stepping forward from this moment, wherever you are and whatever your place is, with a positive intent, because there's a lot that you can actually control in your situation.
And at the end of the day, we don't know what caused an individual person's cancer, but we do know through the mix of six and healthy living that your risk of recurrence of disease and long-term survivorship also go up, and risk, of course, of developing cancer in the first place. So let's get into the mix of six. We start with social support, and Alison will get into more details as to why, but this is really the foundation on which everything is built. And if we don't have the appropriate social support, engaging in healthy living just becomes much more challenging. So from the social support perspective, however, there's both what we could call the direct effect and the indirect effect. And Alison will talk more about the indirect effect of how we need to have a team to allow us to be successful. But if we think about social support also from the direct effect, we know that the flip side of social support, which is actually loneliness and being socially isolated, in and of itself, controlling for anything else you could control for from a medical perspective, is toxic. And we see here very interesting data just from last year that as loneliness goes up, the probability of risk of all-cause mortality goes up as well. And this was in particular for emotional loneliness, so feeling isolated and detached from your environment. So not just that I don't have somebody to help me, it's really about being emotionally isolated. And you can map this onto the genes and inflammatory pathways. We see that people who are lonely and socially isolated have increased inflammation, decreased immune function, etc. There's also something that's called eudaimonic well-being, to be differentiated from hedonic well-being, which most people are familiar with, hedonism and focusing on oneself. We see from this support perspective that just giving of yourself, volunteering in this study out of England, volunteering your time was linked to a reduced risk of early mortality by 22%. Again, issues around risk reduction. So we are a social species, and of course, evolutionarily, there's an adaptive reason why helping others is probably good for our bodies, our genes, our biology, and ultimately health outcomes.
So, as Lorenzo said, we believe that you really need to think carefully about some of the changes that you are interested in making. And before you step forward, you essentially get your team around you of support. Because we all know what it's like to say, okay, I'm going to start exercising tomorrow. I'm going to start eating right. And by 10:30 the next morning, you feel sabotaged and defeated. And if you set in place a team of people around you who's going to support you, it's so much easier to be successful, and you have company in trying to make the changes that you're interested in. So in thinking about a team that you would put together, and I didn't mention this at the beginning, none of these strategies are the strategy. What you need to do is listen and think about whether or not this is something that fits with your life. Can I tweak it slightly and make it work for myself? So it's really about hearing it and thinking about how you can make it your own. So technical and informational support. So that's discussions with your physician, another expert, gathering information, practical support. Who can drive your kids to school? Who can pick up the grandkids or take you to appointments for treatment? Listening support. Who's somebody who shares your values and is just there to listen to you and can kind of give you feedback? Participatory support, somebody who is a colleague or just somebody who's expressed an interest in learning how to meditate, that you could say, hey, let's do something online together and we can learn together. Motivational support. Who is the person in your life that is the cheerleader, who always believes in you and who will always have your back? An emotional support, that one person or couple of people who you can share your deepest worries and fears and your wonderful joys in life. And it's important, if you're a caregiver, to know that your team is different than the person who has a cancer diagnosis. And it's very important that you both have support teams behind you, because it's a big job being the person who is receiving treatment as well as the caregiver.
So we're going to take a little bit of a detour to look at the shape of things in the United States in the moment as it comes to obesity and overweight. And here, obesity is a clinical term. Essentially, we're talking about a body mass index, which is a calculation of height and weight, and a BMI of 30 or above is technically classified as obese. So we're going to flip through these maps very quickly, which show you the percent of adults by state who are classified as obese. And we see here with the lightest, with the darkest yellow, it's 10 to 14%. And as we go over time, we start to see the whole map getting more yellow, and the need for another color, which is 15 to 19%, the need for another color, which is greater than 20%, the need yet for another color, which is greater than 25% of adults being obese, yet a darker red at greater than 30%. And we see here in 2009, there's only one state left that was below, and now all the states are red, with the majority being the darker red. So this is, clearly an example of an epidemic. We've looked at this as it relates to coronavirus, and we see this clearly with the weight of the United States. This is the most recent data, using different colors because of being collected in a different way. And we see here the darkest category now is greater than 35%. This is not going in the direction we want. And although Colorado is still green there, it's still greater than 20% obese. Here's the most recent data with 12 states, greater than 35% of the adults being obese. If we look at some of the underserved groups in our country, this is African Americans between 2016 and 18, with the majority being greater than 35%. This is the most recent data between 17 and 19. Again, quite startling in terms of the percentage of obese. Similarly for our Hispanic colleagues, much worse off. And going in the wrong direction. And when we think about what happens if you have this level of overweight and obesity as children, and the risk of diseases just is going to be overwhelming for our society, because it's not just cancer, of course, that's linked with obesity and overweight. It's also heart disease, Alzheimer's, diabetes, etc. And there's at least a dozen different cancers, if not more, that are linked with obesity and overweight. And obesity and overweight is also linked with worse clinical outcomes after a diagnosis. So this is something that we really need to get control of. And we can't go into all the details in the science, but all of the mix of six are either directly or indirectly related to obesity and overweight. And that's why we really favor this concept of synergy, even for something like weight loss. If you just focus on diet and exercise, sure, you're going to burn more calories and less calories will go in. But if you're chronically stressed and you're sleep deprived, that's also going to dysregulate the system and make it harder to lose and maintain that weight loss. So let's get into the next one, stress and stress management. This area is so important, and why it comes second, because stress can sabotage all good, healthy intentions. Not to mention that stress has a pure biological effect on the body that in the short run is good. Acute stress is actually very adaptive. And I argue that we've probably evolved from ancestors who had a very sensitive, intact stress response, because they're the ones who could respond to threat or danger in their environment and being able to get out of that danger, the fight or flight response. The problem is when that fight or flight response becomes chronic. And it is, in fact, the same response that you would have when you are chronically stressed, sitting at your computer. It's as if you're on the savannah trying to fight or flee potential danger. And this biological response is no longer adaptive once it becomes chronic. Increase in heart rate and blood pressure, shunting of your blood from the peripheral muscles into the internal parts of the body, a narrowing even of the cornea so you can see long distances, which you can understand how that would be adaptive in hunter-gatherer and pre-times. Not so adaptive if you're sitting at your computer or sitting in traffic or having an argument with your family member or friends. And so what we know is that stress can actually impact every single biological system in our body. So much so that it's getting right into the nucleus of every single cell in our body and having an impact on our chromosomes that you see pictured here. What you see pictured in pink are what are called telomeres. And telomeres are essentially a cap on the end of every chromosome that helps to maintain chromosomal stability. As telomeres shorten, called telomere attrition, and the cell divides, you have what's called chromosomal instability. This is actually one of the hallmarks and a risk factor for cancer. As we age, our telomeres shorten. This is just part of the aging process, and you can actually assess somebody's biological age to some degree just by measuring the length of their telomeres. What we've learned by elegant research from Nobel Prize winner Elizabeth Blackburn and her colleague Alyssa Epel is that chronic stress leads to telomere attrition. That means that chronic stress is literally speeding the aging process, something that we want to reverse. Chronic stress and the biological processes that are activated literally get into the tumor microenvironment, making it hospitable to more cancer growth. Chronic stress activates all of the cancer hallmarks, something that we must get control of. And we know how to do that, of course, as this doctor is saying to the patient, stress is killing you. You just need an easier job, a smaller house, and a different family. And, you know, those of you who have families know that to some degree this is probably true, but not really a prescription that we can write out for patients. This stress is probably more true now than ever, being trapped in our houses with our family. But there are so many different things that can be done from a behavioral perspective, evidence-based. And these things you see listed here are conventional in nature, cognitive behavioral therapy, individual or group therapy, and then what we call these less conventional things that are part of this growing field of integrative medicine, things like yoga, tai chi, meditation, hypnosis. What's important to know is that these interventions don't just make us feel better, they actually have an impact on the cancer hallmarks, leading to less immune suppression. Research showing that an 8-week meditation program modified the speed of telomere attrition. So literally, again, having an impact on multiple biological processes. And if that wasn't enough, it actually has an impact on modifying not only our brain activity, but our brain anatomy. And this was a fabulous paper, again, just an 8-week meditation program that led to an increase in the size of our hippocampus. We want to maintain a large hippocampus because that's part of the memory center of our brain. So it's not just, again, about quality of life, it's about changing our biology, making our allowing our bodies to be less vulnerable to cancer.
When our children were young, we have 2 of our 3 there, the dark-haired kids, we realized that we didn't really have a mind-body practice. And we felt that that was a real area where we were lacking. And so we started meditating with our kids. And this is something that you can do with your grandchildren, your nieces, your nephews, the people who you live with. And so we, every morning before school, we sat down and we meditated from 2 minutes to 11 minutes with our kids. We engaged with them to help us choose a guided meditation online that they liked. And we were able to try and help them as well as ourselves. I found most of the time it was somewhat difficult, as you'll see, because this is the ideal, but this is the reality of, you know, learning something new and trying to make it work in your family. But when I was able to look at the kids and see the effects that just a simple short meditation had, it was really transformative. And as well for us. One of the people that we talk to in our book, Molly, a dear friend from Canada and who we see up in this area of Georgian Bay here, 20 years ago was diagnosed with a glioblastoma multiforme. And this is a very aggressive and difficult cancer to deal with. And she had finished her conventional treatment and really felt that she was lacking in this area of mind body. And so she took a course that was offered at her hospital and started to incorporate this practice into her daily life. And so she had her family help her write sticky notes that she put all around the house to reframe the way in which she was thinking, because she was really in a negative space and wanted to change that. And so things like, you are not this illness. What is the positive moment right now that you can see? She does a guided imagery. She does guided imagery every morning where she thinks about the body of water behind her in this picture with fish swimming out of it into her body, taking the cancer away, and then swimming back into the water, importantly, leaving her body. She thinks about people who've passed in her life who are important to her, who come back and put healing hands on her and help her heal. She has an active yoga practice. Her faith is very important. She's also investigated, and used therapy. One of the stories that I wanted to mention when we were talking about social support is another person who we spoke to in the book, Dorothy. She had a cancer diagnosis, and then her husband received a cancer diagnosis, and she was feeling very down and worried, and her friends could see that she was struggling. And this is in the area of social support, that sometimes we need to step out of our comfort zone. And so a friend of hers gave her 3 sessions of therapy as a gift, because she could see that she really needed to have that added support in place to help her sort through some of these feelings. So important that we think in bigger ways sometimes about how we can support each other. And the actual act of doing that is not only good for the person who does it, but also the person who receives it. So just some suggestions or thoughts on how different people have put into place a mind-body practice.
And Dorothy continues with her therapy to this day. And when I was diagnosed with cancer, Molly reached out and essentially gave me a talking to via email about how important it is for the mind-body component, and that I cannot shortchange that. This is what Molly prioritizes over all other aspects of the mix of 6. Don't get me wrong, she engages in all of the mix of 6, but this is not something she would ever skip. And we just spoke to her a couple of weeks ago, and she's actually cancer free now, which, it had come back and they were doing things, and, a 20-year plus GBM patient, it's essentially unheard of. We're so proud of her. Sleep is the next area. And interestingly, there wasn't a lot of understanding of what the biological purpose of sleep was. We know that this is the time when the body restores itself, but there wasn't, a deep understanding of what that biology was. We know from overwhelming number of papers that too little, but also too much, which is often reflective of an illness state, are associated with living less long. And in particular, 6.5 hours or less a night is associated with increased mortality, all cause as well, specifically of cancer. Sleep has actually been also listed as a probable carcinogen. Unlike a known carcinogen like alcohol or asbestos, it goes into this grayer category, but again, something that we can control, and something that does influence multiple cancer hallmarks. People who are sleep deprived are immunosuppressed, making them more vulnerable to that cancer cell growing out of control, and other biological processes. Important, it's also related to our cognitive functioning, because we know that this new system that was discovered in the body called the glymphatic system that is in our brain helps to clean away refuse that builds up during the day, amyloid plaques being one example. And the glymphatic system is only active when we sleep. So that's why we actually see a link between sleep deprivation, sleep loss, and Alzheimer's, as well as other forms of dementia.
So I dreamed I got 8 hours of sleep. If only. So if sleep is an area of concern for you, one sleep expert that we spoke to said that uh, if you are having sleep disturbance 3 nights a week for 3 months, then that's the time to go and to speak to a physician to figure out whether or not you have something else going on. If you think that your sleep is related to sleep hygiene issues, we look at it during the day and during the night. So during the day, there are a number of things you can do. You know, exercising, even as little as 10 minutes, can impact the way in which you sleep. Napping, if you nap, that you set the alarm so that it's a 20-minute nap, 20 to 30 minutes. If you are having sleep disturbance, you want to get rid of the nap to see what's going on, because otherwise that will impact it. Light exposure, being outside every day and making sure that you have a little bit of exposure to light. We use our senses at night to guide us, in addition to building a routine, which is really critical, kind of going to bed at around the same time, switching off those devices and getting rid of the screen time so that your body can relax, because it is so stressful right now that you know, you can end up watching television or being on your phone or reading the newspaper, and it's good to just step away from all of that. But so vision, do you have light coming in from outside? Do you have electronic devices in the room that are emitting light that is disturbing? Lorenzo, when we travel, we take tape with us so that we can tape up all of those lights so that if you do wake up a little bit, that you're not disturbed. Smell, you know, spraying a non-toxic spray on your pillow to relax you before bed.
Like lavender.
Yeah, and a lavender spray. Something like what are you hearing when you're in your room? Is that what's disturbing you? So do you need to have earplugs? Do you need to have a pillow? Taste. Are you eating chocolate, drinking coffee, drinking alcohol? We know that alcohol causes arousal essentially as it's metabolizing later in the evening. And so that can bring you out of sleep. Coffee also, you know, can significantly, or caffeine can significantly impact your sleep. Feeling, is your room too hot or is it too cold? Do you have everything set up that way? So there are many different tools. We just have to be really methodical in figuring out what is causing us to have impaired sleep.
So the next area is exercise, and we don't have to dwell too long on exercise because exercise is just clearly linked with cancer risk and excessive sedentary behavior. And of course, the flip side is moving. And the more you're engaging in physical activity, the lower your risk of a number of different cancers. And you see that here in the dark line compared, which are essentially this dose response relationship as energy expenditure goes up, which is measured in MET hours. You see there the risk for a number of different cancers goes down. And here's a list of those cancers. And the same is true after a diagnosis of cancer. Those who are more physically active have a lower probability of recurrence of disease and they live longer. And the data continues to emerge. Literally just this week, published in the Top Cancer Journal, showing that the most active endometrial cancer patients, independent of stage, lived longer and had a lower probability of recurrence of disease. So the challenge, however, now with the evidence that's emerging, it's not just about exercising and moving more. It's also just about sitting less, because this data, which is looking at hazard ratios, and as that goes up, your hazard of cardiovascular disease and cancer going up, the more that you are sedentary, independent of how much you are active during the day. So it's controlling for that. So yes, you need to exercise ideally an hour a day, but you also just need to sit less, because that will have an independent effect on your risk. And exercise also innervates all the cancer hallmarks. So something that's critically important to start engaging in. And it's not only about living longer and having a lower probability of occurrence of disease or preventing cancer, but the quality of life benefits that you see listed here are profound. And people who remain active throughout treatment have better quality of life and do better and are able to remain more engaged in their lives.
So one of the ways to start looking at where you are in regards to exercise is keeping a log or using something like a Fitbit. Because we're all now at home, we're actually a lot more sedentary than potentially we were before. And if you are in cancer treatment, sometimes just getting up the driveway or, down the stairs is a challenge. But the key is to keep a log and see where you are and see if you can build on it. So if you're sitting right now, you could stand up and listen to us for a while standing up. Breaking up your day. So if you're at the computer all day long, breaking it up with, a walk. If you have a pet, it really helps. We have a dog, and so it actually pushes us to be outside at least 3 times a day. Developing that fitness routine that works for you. There are traditional ways to do it and non-traditional ways to do it. And I'll just speak to that in the next slide, but one of the things to also think about is that while our kids were really young, we would spend at least one of the weekend days with a big group of people who played soccer together, so that we made social events into things that involved exercise versus eating. And cakes and all of the rest of it. So we tried to do that as much as possible to organize events like this. Lorenzo, on the other hand, I would go to the gym and had a more traditional, I have a friend who I exercise with, which really helps get me there and keep me there. Lorenzo was working. We had a machine actually in the house, and he was getting up at 5 a.m, and I noticed, this was many years ago, but I noticed that he just was looking unwell because he was decreasing his sleep in order to exercise. And we had a discussion, and I said, you're going to have to figure something else out. And so one of the things that he did was that he works on the 12th floor at MD Anderson and takes the stairs all the time. He does not take the elevator. So there are ways that you can build in these, less traditional ways of exercising, like walking meetings. Now, given that we're at home, a lot of us, you can put your earphones on and have a walking meeting as you walk around the block. So when he was at work, he asked for a stand-up desk and got one. Then he wanted a treadmill and they said no. So he bought a recumbent bike and put it under his desk at work so that he can pull it in and out and he can cycle while he works. So there's many different ways that we can build in movement now, and especially as many of us are behind desks.
So the area of diet, some people make complicated, and I think the diet industry is the one that benefits the most from trying to make diet complicated. And Alison will take us to the prescription specifically, but before we get there, we just want to, point out how we have transformed our food system. The foods that we eat now are not even recognized by our hunter-gatherer ancestors, which of course is the majority of time we were on this planet was pre-agriculture. And this is, the outcomes of mass agriculture for how we raise cows, for how we raise pigs, for how we raise chickens. And what this means is that it's actually transformed the quality of the food, not the least of which is how we raise our food is transforming, but what we put in our food. As you see pictured here, the tremendous increase in the amount of sugar. And this is just added sugars, let alone our insatiable appetite of refined carbohydrates, essentially not eating whole foods, eating a lot of processed foods. And all of this, again, is linked with biological processes that are linked with cancer outcomes: excessive meat consumption, excessive sugar consumption, excessive glycemic load. foods that increase your sugar levels dramatically at one sitting. Now, on the flip side of this, and the good news, of course, is that there's a lot of data on what helps reduce risk of cancer, and it's essentially eating more plants and eating more whole foods. And you see that picture here with overall cancer incidence going down the closer somebody is getting to being a pure vegan, meaning not eating animal products. And it's not as simple as just, well, just tell me the one or two vegetables to eat and everything will be fine. It's about the variety. And we see that here in a cohort of breast cancer patients where they were able to show, yes, cruciferous vegetables were very important. Women who had high cruciferous vegetable, even if they had low overall vegetable intake, they still had a 20% risk reduction compared to women not eating a high amount of cruciferous. But you look here what happens to women who are all high in cruciferous, but then they increase their variety of other vegetables. Their risk reduction continues to go down as much as 52%. And we know, again, back to the cancer hallmarks, that diet and essentially eating this whole food plant-centered diet will have an impact on all the cancer hallmarks.
So are we saying that you need to become a vegetarian or a vegan? And here it says, I'm trying to eat more vegetarians. No, we're not. But what we are saying, as Lorenzo said, it's about bringing in more vegetables and plant-based foods to your diet. And one of the things that's very challenging is that, as I'm sure everybody knows, we've all tried diets, they don't end up working. What really works is when you slowly change the way in which you're eating over time. And the best way to try and think about that for us was that we started to push out things that were not healthy for us by introducing new things. And so if you look at this plate, we have a plate that's filled half of it with vegetables. So when I would think about cooking, I would think, how am I going to fill half of the plate with vegetables and things that are healthy, not high glycemic load vegetables like a white potato. Instead, we're looking at broccoli and cauliflower and peppers, the rainbow, like everybody speaks about, of vegetables. So it's really bringing that in, then looking at a tiny amount or a very small amount of fruit. The grains, the legumes, the healthy, lean, clean animal protein if you're going to eat animal protein, looking at nuts, thinking about your day. So how do you do that? You need to start at breakfast, because in order to get in all of those vegetables that are recommended, the best place to start is at breakfast. So with our kids, whatever we have left over in the fridge from the night before is served with breakfast. So it can be oatmeal and coleslaw or oatmeal and asparagus, bringing that in so that they start the day with a healthy vegetable to start. We often can think about the way in which you start your day. You could have a bagel. You could then move on to a sandwich for lunch. You could have pizza and pasta for dinner. And so in doing that, you've had a lot of white carbohydrates that actually are not health sustaining foods. So it's really important to think about, what can I do in order to improve what I eat at every meal. One of the things that we talk about is looking at eating food through groups. So, am I going to be getting broccoli or cauliflower, kale every day in some form or another? Am I eating onions and garlic? Looking at your fruit, often, especially if you're eating dried fruit, it's important to remember that I wouldn't normally eat 5 dried apricot or 5 whole apricots. I would eat maybe 1. And so when you're eating the dried fruit with a snack, if you're pairing it with a nut for an afternoon snack, not to eat too much of that. The stone fruits and the berries obviously have antioxidant values. So looking at all of these foods actually feed your cells. And thinking about it this way, I often think, if I'm not feeling good because I've made some poor choices about the way in which I'm eating, I realize that that is affecting my cells. And so while I feel badly on the outside, I'm also feeling badly on the inside. So also thinking about what herbs and spices can I cook with that will reduce inflammation. So it's really feeding the body with all of these good things. And there's so many different websites available that I find great, and cookbook authors like Yotam Ottolenghi, who does a lot of vegetarian stuff that you can adapt and make it vegan. Sarah Britton. There are many people who do really fantastic taking foods. One of the things that we have in our families, we have the 3-bite rule. So you take that first bite, nobody likes it. And then you take the second bite and you still don't like it, but maybe you're thinking you might. And then the third bite, you've sort of changed your mind and you finish off.
So Alison's point about what you feel on the inside is going to also reflect on your biology. Yeah. You feel on the outside. I mean, you can, so heartburn, indigestion, there's a whole industry out there. And the reason you're having indigestion is more often than not, you've eaten something that's not healthy for you and you're having reflux from the stomach into the esophagus. This is a risk factor for cancer. And one of our friends was actually just diagnosed with esophageal cancer. And when he learned that indigestion and reflux cause cancer, which he didn't know until he was diagnosed, he thought, I've had indigestion for over 20 years. And that's ultimately what ends up happening, and for sure a cancer that our friend could have avoided. The other area that's really important is our microbiome, and you've probably all heard of the microbiome, the bacteria that live on and in us, primarily in our gut, will influence your health, your risk of cancer. Importantly, response to treatment data that we've published at MD Anderson showing the patients who have the most diverse microbiome, which is the important factor, not a particular bacteria per se, but the more diverse, the higher probability of response to immunotherapy. And I wrote a little op-ed on this in the Wall Street Journal, and essentially it comes back to your diet. And there is no quick fix. Probiotics may be damaging. Excessive fermented foods that you see pictured here on the right are healthy, but if they're eaten in an excess, you're going to create dysbiosis, meaning too much of even a healthy bacteria. It's really all about eating these soluble fibers, meaning fibers that will ferment in the gut and feed the healthy bacteria. And you see, this is all from the plant world.
So also a food diary, a great place to start, looking at your ratio. So are you 90% health sustaining, 10% neutral, or health depleting? So looking at foods that really support your health 90% of the time, reading those labels, because there is sugar in everything. A calorie is not a calorie. 50 calories of chocolate chip cookie is not 50 calories of broccoli, and it's not feeding you in that way. So there's lots of different resources available. Just another thing, we go to a farmer's market, so we fill up at the beginning of the week and eat out of it. An option for you to think about. So often we're kind of trapped in our ways. Here is our daughter's birthday party with 30 kids. We showed, beans, hummus, edamame, and put it in front of them and let them sit there for 45 minutes. And by the end of it, everybody was eating it. And then they had the treat, which was the cookie. So we can do that also in the way in which we gather for adults.
So this is where synergy is critically important. And you see pictured here the data actually from a clinical trial that did a dietary intervention in breast cancer patients. And there was some benefit to increasing fruit and vegetables. But where you really saw benefit was when individuals engaged in increasing their exercise as well as dietary habits, together leading to much better outcomes. The last category, and we'll be very brief here, is the environment. There's, as I've been talking about, carcinogens, things that we know cause cancer, and then more challenging are endocrine disruptors. These are products that are chemicals that are in our personal care products, plastic, BPA, that modify our hormones and have been clearly shown to be linked with a number of different cancers, in particular hormonally related cancers, breast cancer, ovarian cancer, prostate cancer.
So what do you do with all of this exposure? One of the things you can control are the things from the top of your head to the tip of your toes and what's in your house. So adopt the precautionary principle where you do not use a product unless you know that it is being tested and that it is safe for you. You know, with 85,000 approximate chemicals out there and only 8% approximately that have been tested, we know that we're not being looked after. So it's really important. The best website is EWG, environmentalworkinggroup.org, and they have lots of resources for you to help you navigate what products are healthy. And it's about just changing out as you use up old things. So what to strive for? Remember that harnessing of the team so that they can support you in whatever it is that you're looking to make change in. You know, thinking about a mind-body practice that really works for you, that you can do with your family or your partner. Sleeping well, really, really critical. Getting out and exercising and establishing a routine that works, that 90-10 split with food and just bringing in new stuff and pushing out that unhealthy, and then watching your environmental exposures as the best that you can in the environments that you control. So it's really about creating, as we said, positive synergy instead of negative, and looking at ways that it really can work for you, and knowing that there's 6 areas. So even if you're not terrific in one, you know that the other ones that you are doing well and are supporting that. And it's a practice, like everything. And the more that you practice, the better you get.
So we're hoping that you will start Anticancer Living today and start to think about what your next step is. Thank you.
Thank you.